You know, that feeling, that constant hum of, not enough. You just finished something big. Maybe you finally tackled that messy kitchen, helped a friend out, and still, that little voice pops up.
Always there.
Could have been better. Or missed that spot, should have done more. It's just this relentless pressure, right, to be perfect.
Yeah, it really weighs you down.
And it sucks the joy out of things you actually accomplish. Sometimes it even stops you from starting because, well, what's the point if it won't be flawless?
That's a big one, the paralysis.
Yeah, maybe you just feel totally exhausted, or like you want to cry, or like there's all this potential inside you, but it's just stuck because you're so caught up in getting things exactly right.
It's an incredibly common feeling, actually. And often pretty isolating, isn't it?
Totally.
And like you said, it's not just about work or, you know, the big external stuff. It's this deep pressure we put on ourselves everywhere. At home, relationships, hobbies.
Even simple daily tasks. So here's the question we were kind of wrestling with as we went through all this material, the research, personal stories, different perspectives. What if those standards you're aiming for, the ones you think are pushing you, what if they're actually the things holding you back, costing you your peace, your energy, your joy?
That's the core of it.
Our mission for this deep dive is really to unpack that stress, the stress of perfectionism, and pull out some hopefully surprising insights and actionable steps to find some freedom from those impossible standards.
Okay, let's unpack it then.
Yeah.
One of the clearest things that jumped out from the sources is just how heavy the cost really is.
Yeah.
Chasing perfect takes a toll.
Oh, yeah. It hit me how many different ways it actually shows up. Like right off the bat, there's just the pure exhaustion, burnout.
Constant push.
Constantly pushing towards something you can't actually reach, never feeling like it's good enough. It just drains your battery completely.
There's no real space left to recharge, is there?
None.
That perpetual striving, it just leaves no room for rest. And tied right into that is, well, anxiety.
Oh, definitely.
The material points to this chronic fear of failing, making mistakes, or just not measuring up to those super high internal expectations.
It can honestly feel like you're walking on eggshells in your own life.
Yeah, exactly.
And that fear, wow, it can be absolutely paralyzing. It's like one of the main things behind procrastination, isn't it?
It really is. You know you should start that project or tidy up or make that call.
Yeah.
But the fear of not doing it perfectly is just so huge that you just don't. You put it off.
And then the guilt kicks in and the shame because you didn't start. It's a nasty cycle.
A really vicious cycle. And what's also striking is the impact it has on relationships.
Right, that came up.
When you're so hyper-focused on getting everything perfect, it often creates this rigid, critical kind of environment. And that can easily spill over into how you interact with other people.
Like putting those same crazy expectations on them, maybe without even realizing it.
Exactly. The sources mention how these unrealistic expectations for yourself and sometimes implicitly for others just create a lot of tension and disappointment.
Yeah, I can see that. And maybe the saddest cost that was mentioned is just the loss of joy.
That's a big one.
When your focus is only on the perfect outcome, you totally miss the pleasure of the process, you know?
Yeah.
The satisfaction of just doing...
Life becomes a checklist.
Right. An endless, unfulfilling checklist. You're so busy trying to get it perfect that you miss the simple moments, connection, creativity, just being.
People talked about that exhaustion, wanting to cry.
Yeah, or looking back and feeling like potential was wasted because they were sweating the tiny details instead of the bigger picture.
And it's not just certain types of people. Even folks who seem incredibly successful from the outside often struggle with this intense internal battle.
It's so widespread.
It really is.
Yeah.
But okay, here's where we can start to break it down a bit. The research makes a point that perfectionism isn't just one single thing. It's got different facets, different dimensions.
Right, and this was a really key insight for me. It's not simply about having high standards.
No.
The sources make a distinction between having high standards or wanting order. Sometimes they call that adaptive perfectionism, which can actually be positive.
Yeah, that can be linked to good things like motivation, feeling capable, having a clearer sense of purpose, striving for excellence, being organized. Those aren't inherently bad.
Okay.
The problematic side, what the research often calls maladaptive perfectionism, that's strongly connected to something called discrepancy.
Discrepancy.
Yeah, it's not just having high standards. It's the deep distress and worry that comes from feeling like there's a huge gap between your standards and how you actually perform.
Okay. Okay, so it's not the high bar itself that's necessarily the issue.
Not always.
It's the painful feeling that you're constantly falling short of it and the intense worry that comes with that feeling.
Spot on. The data really emphasizes that this feeling of discrepancy, way more than just having high standards on their own, is what links perfectionism to all those negative things we talked about, the anxiety, the stress, feeling worthless.
It's the inner critic just hammering on that gap.
Exactly. That's the fuel for the fire.
Okay, so if that maladaptive perfectionism is driven by this harsh inner critic, this painful feeling of never measuring up, what's the fix? What's the antidote the sources point towards?
So this brings us to a really crucial concept: self-compassion.
Right.
Think about that inner coach critic you mentioned, that voice full of self-doubt, the one that screams you're a failure if you don't hit those impossible marks.
Yeah, the one that waits till you finish something and then says, yeah, but it wasn't perfect. You messed up this one little thing.
Precisely that one.
Yep.
Self-compassion is about intentionally cultivating an inner coach compassion instead.
Coach compassion. I like that. It means actively choosing to treat yourself with the same kindness, the same understanding, patience, support, all the things you naturally offer a good friend who is struggling.
Right. You wouldn't tear a friend down for making a mistake.
Exactly. You'd be supportive. And it's grounded in recognizing our shared humanity. You know, the basic understanding that making mistakes, having setbacks, being imperfect, that's just part of being human. It's not some unique personal failing.
So it's less about beating yourself up when you fall short and more about offering yourself some grace.
Absolutely, extending grace. And the research really underlines how protective this is. It actually acts as a buffer.
A buffer. How so?
The sources show that self-compassion significantly weakens the link between that maladaptive perfectionism, that painful discrepancy feeling, and psychological distress, like anxiety and depression.
Wow, okay.
People with higher levels of self-compassion, even when they're striving towards goals, they're just less crippled by the fear of failure. They bounce back faster from setbacks.
More resilient.
Yeah, much more resilient because they aren't adding harsh self-judgment on top of whatever difficulty they're already facing.
That's actually a really empowering insight. It suggests the path to freedom isn't necessarily about, like, lowering your goals.
Not necessarily.
But about fundamentally changing the relationship you have with your standards and maybe more importantly with yourself when things aren't perfect.
That's it exactly. Changing the relationship.
So how do we actually do that? How do we put this into practice? How do we start shifting from chasing this impossible perfect to embracing a healthier, more sustainable good enough?
This is where we get into the actionable stuff. And it's really key here to frame good enough, not as settling, not as mediocrity.
Right, not giving up.
No, but as choosing a healthier, often more effective path forward. It lets you actually finish things and move on, instead of getting perpetually stuck chasing an illusion.
Okay, let's dig into some of these practical steps then. What's first?
One of the first things highlighted is challenging those deep beliefs that are driving the perfectionism in the first place.
Okay, like digging deeper.
Yeah. Why do you feel this intense need? Is it fear? Fear of not being loved or accepted if you're not flawless? Is it needing external validation? Start questioning those core beliefs. Ask yourself, are they actually true? Are they serving you now? Or were they maybe formed a long time ago and are just holding you back today?
That foundational work sounds crucial.
It really is. And then shift your focus. Move away from obsessing about the perfect outcome and focus instead on progress.
Progress, not perfection.
Exactly. Break down those huge, daunting tasks, organizing the entire house, starting a new fitness routine, that massive work project. Break them into smaller, manageable steps.
Baby steps.
Baby steps are still steps. The material reminds us of that.
Yeah.
And celebrate those small wins along the way. It actually helps retrain your brain to value moving forward, not just nailing some flawless finish line.
Okay, that makes sense. Then there's embracing imperfection itself, which sounds simple, but it's probably a huge hurdle for perfectionists.
Oh, it's massive. You have to actively work to reframe mistakes. See them not as like catastrophic proof that you're inadequate.
Which is the default reaction, right?
Totally. But try to see them as essential. Valuable learning opportunities. Think about how successful people often talk about failure.
Yeah, there are some great quotes, like the J.K. Rowling one.
Yes. It is impossible to live without failing at something, unless you live so cautiously that you might as well not have lived at all.
In which case, you have failed by default.
Wow. Or Thomas Edison, I have not failed, I've just found 10,000 ways it won't work.
Right. Even Churchill, facing huge challenges, said something like, success consists of going from failure to failure without loss of enthusiasm.
In Henry Ford, failure is simply the opportunity to begin again, this time more intelligently.
These weren't people who were terrified of failure. They saw it as, like, part of the process, necessary even.
Exactly. It brings to mind those simple but powerful ideas. Perfection is the enemy of good.
Yeah, or that other one. Perfection is not when there is nothing left to add, but when there is nothing else to take away. Sometimes getting it done well enough to move forward is the best outcome.
Absolutely. And linked to this is prioritizing self-care. It isn't some fluffy luxury. It's essential when you're battling perfectionism, which is inherently stressful.
You can't pour from an empty cup.
You really can't. The sources offered practical tips, even for things like sleep. Simple stuff like reducing screen time before bed, maybe lowering the brightness.
Trying a simple mindfulness body scan.
Yeah, aiming for consistent sleep and wake times, avoiding caffeine later in the day, basic but important, and setting boundaries.
Oh, boundaries are huge. Learning to say no.
Yes, learning to say no when you're overloaded is a fundamental act of self-compassion. It stops you from taking on too much and then inevitably feeling like a failure because you couldn't possibly do it all perfectly.
That's a really good point. Another strategy that felt maybe a bit counterintuitive but really helpful was intentionally practicing doing things imperfectly.
Right. Especially in areas where the outcome doesn't feel super critical.
Yeah, there was that great example about someone who felt immense pressure to be a perfect writer, right? Which made writing totally paralyzing. But they also played guitar and just didn't care about being good at it. They could noodle around, make mistakes, enjoy the process.
A bad writing session felt like failure, but a bad guitar session was just whatever.
Yeah.
A few wrong notes, easily forgotten.
Exactly. Find those low-stakes areas where you can just do something for the sake of doing it without that perfection pressure.
It really shows the freedom that comes when you detach your self-worth from the outcome, doesn't it? Another useful technique is just gaining perspective.
Stepping back.
Yeah. Ask yourself, will this specific mistake or imperfection really matter in 5 years? Will I even remember it next week?
Often the answer is a definite no.
Right. And that can immediately dial down the intensity of the pressure. Taking breaks from social media helps here too, reducing that constant comparison trap.
Definitely. And finally, maybe the most powerful practice, the one that kind of brings it all together, treat yourself like you would treat a friend.
The golden rule applied inward.
Yeah. When you mess up, when you feel overwhelmed, when you don't meet that impossible standard, just pause. Ask yourself honestly, what would I say to my best friend if they were going through this exact thing?
Would you call them a failure? Tell them they weren't good enough?
Of course not. You'd offer kindness, understanding, encouragement, remind them everyone makes mistakes.
So the practice is to consciously offer yourself that same compassionate voice. Activate that inner coach compassion.
Coach compassion. I'm going to remember that one.
It really ties into this helpful framework mentioned in some of the sources involving 3 pillars: drive, threat, and compassion.
Okay. Drive, threat, compassion.
Drive is our motivation, right? To achieve, to move forward. Threat is our response to danger, fear, anxiety, the safety-seeking system.
And compassion is about care, connection, resilience, calming things down.
It's exactly. Perfectionism tends to massively overemphasize drive, that relentless push and threat, the fear of failure, the harsh self-criticism.
While totally neglecting compassion.
Right. It throws the whole system out of balance. Cultivating self-compassion helps balance this tripod. It doesn't mean you lose your drive. It just means you can pursue your goals with a less crippling fear and more grace, more resilience when things inevitably aren't perfect.
Which leads to greater well-being overall, and ironically probably makes you more effective in the long run because you're not getting stuck.
Precisely.
So wrapping this up, what we've seen in this deep dive is that while high standards can be okay, even good,
Adaptive striving.
the real suffering comes from that maladaptive perfectionism, the kind fueled by a harsh inner critic, and that painful feeling of always falling short. And this takes a huge toll everywhere in your life, including, the quiet spaces of home.
And the key lesson, the most powerful takeaway really, is that finding freedom from those impossible standards doesn't come from finally achieving perfection.
Yeah.
It's impossible. It comes from embracing good enough and actively, intentionally practicing self-compassion. It's about fundamentally changing your relationship with your own standards, and maybe more importantly with yourself, especially when things aren't flawless.
So it's not about giving up on striving, it's shifting how you strive. Moving from striving driven by fear and self-criticism.
To striving rooted in self-acceptance and resilience. It's a much healthier and ultimately more sustainable way to live.
So here's something to maybe carry with you, something to ponder today.
Yeah.
What small step could you take right now, maybe in whatever you're doing next, to be just a little bit kinder to yourself when things aren't perfect?
Or, think about this. What if your actual worth isn't tied to flawless performance at all? What if it's tied more to the courage it takes to try, the grace you show yourself when you stumble, and just the simple act of being human?
Something to think about for sure.
Definitely.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.